Welcome to the On Meta report for Company of Heroes 3, covering August and September 2024. In this video, I'm going to be sharing my view on what is the most viable on meta strategies for each faction in 1v1. I'll do this by analysing the battle groups, units, and technologies selected, and how they are being used effectively to win. I'll also give you some tips so you're prepared how to counter them when you take them on yourself. The core changes in Onyx Shark have been a welcome step in the right direction, with notable changes to time to kill for infantry, vehicle garrisons, and a range of unit ability changes. Since the 1.7 Onyx patch released on July the 16th, we're seeing an almost 50% win rate for all factions in 1v1. Has balance been achieved? Not quite, but it's certainly the best patch yet. So looking at the top 1600 ELO range of players, we can see that the win rate begins to deviate. United States forces, they've got a bit of advantage over the other factions. They've got a win rate of 54%, and DAC's got a win rate of 44%. So why is this deviation occurring at higher ranks? This is due to the metagame, which has developed to include multiple light vehicles being constructed to achieve numerical superiority and quickly take advantage of an opportunity through their high mobility. High rank players, through their experience and better mechanics, tend to be better at avoiding anti-tank gun units, multitasking their many light vehicles around the map, and looking for that opportunity to punish the opponent hard and fast with minimal idle time. The factions with the greatest success of the light vehicle-based play are United States Forces and Wehrmacht, and this is because of their powerful battle group abilities to back it up. Personally, this patch I've played 116 games so far with a 68% win rate using both on-meta and off-meta strategies. So let's explore what those on-meta strategies are. Starting with the United States Forces, the on-meta strategy involves getting riflemen to lead the way and having an armada of motor pool units coming up the trail to follow. The goal is to use the mobility to create a numerical superiority and overwhelm the opponent one part of the map at a time. This is best complemented with Armor Battle Group and Infantry Support Center. Infantry Support Center provides the ability to snowball an early game advantage by getting the captain out as a free unit, applying more pressure on the map, which buys you time to get the passive battle group abilities of War Machine and Strength and Steel to allow for very cost-effective vehicle strategies, while Seek and Destroy can deliver a killing blow. The core primary units include usually 3 to 4 riflemen, the captain, engineer with the sweeper, and then going from tier 3, getting the mode pool units out and getting as many M8s, Shaffies, or anti-tank guns as feasible. The situational secondary units can include a Jeep, a mortar, or M31 recovery vehicles to get those repairs really quickly going. Bars and grenades stand as the most essential tech upgrades, with the Infantry Support Center upgrades losing a little bit of strength in comparison to just simply getting more vehicles and using the Armor Battle Group passive buffs from Strength and Steel, War Machine, and if necessary, Seek and Destroy to hurt the Axis opponent. But that's not to say that a sneaky little M6 AT mine can't turn the tide of a battle. I'll let you make the call on that. The general strategy involves riflemen screening for your vehicles and aiming to get sight on key Axis support weapons, so vehicles have safe passage to hit the Axis army. Continually harass whilst building up a big mass of light vehicles and then attack hard and fast in a single location with Seek and Destroy blazing away and the riflemen cutting down all the stragglers. Variants can include mixing in some Scots or Easy 8 Shermans as an alternative pathway option. The Scot in particular can be quite menacing on some wide maps where anti-tank guns might not have a clear firing line, so maps like Pacino or the hedges on Faminesville, but be mindful if you do this that access to Seek and Destroy will be lost. Easy 8 Shermans are always a threat and can catch an opponent off guard, especially if they've committed to multiple handheld AT Jaeger units. Now, in terms of counter tips, how can you take on a USF player that is going for this strategy? My advice, maintain good vision control and listen in the fog of war to know where the US armor mass is intending to strike. Having plenty of mines scattered throughout the map with overlapping anti-tank on fire with handheld AT infantry and support is a really good way to absorb the hit from the opponent's vehicles. But most importantly, be aggressive where you can. Every single anti-tank gun round you hit them with means that the USF player is going to be repairing, they're going to be out of the fight, and they're going to have the inability to strike with a full force buffed by Seek and Destroy. So don't sit back and do nothing. Try to be constantly aggressive. Poke forward and try get your anti-tank guns and MGs or snipers to inflict that little pain to force an engagement. The Wehrmacht meta involves using infantry and support units to hold the line until 3 CPs tick over, and at that point, the 8-rad can be called in and save the day. So it's very similar to USF. The goal is to use vehicle mobility to break down the opponent, and when their weakness is recognized, to go on the offensive. Mechanized battle group is the option to pick here, with raid package being the first selection, followed by the 8-rad armored car. And then you want to work your way down towards the right-hand side where you could get spotting scopes. Raid package and spotting scopes gives the Axis light vehicles a lot of mobility. You've got the ability to cap the map and also see a lot of the map, which leads to great decision making. The noticeable power spike of this doctrine, though, is the timing of the 8-rad, but also when mechanized assault is used in an engagement. Mechanized assault allows you to repair in an engagement, and it buffs your nearby infantry. It's a very powerful ability, one that I'd probably regard as the best battle group ability in the game. It allows Axis Armor to really spearhead an assault. The core primary units for this one is to start off with an additional Pioneer or Kettenkrad for some extra capping power, then mix in 3 to 4 Grenadiers, and hold those until you may need some Pack 40s, and just keep on staying alive until you hit 3 CPs and you can start to spam those 8-rads in. The 8-rad allows for cost-effective trading against any allied infantry and even offers a little bit of bait for your Pack 40s to gobble up any allied vehicles that try to chase down the 8-rad. The situational secondary units include an MG42 if you want to lock down a section of the map, and also a mortar or a sniper makes for great play to shut down any allied play that's more defensive in nature, where there's anti-tank guns and infantry sitting in good cover positions, and you just want to force them to either attack or give up map control. Key techs include the Infantry Officer Quarters Vet 1 upgrade. This allows your Grenadiers to instantly get Vet 1 and sustain each other with healing on the field. It also allows you to control the map quite well in the early game, with the Vet 1 improving offense and defensive stats. So this can make your Grenadiers better take on any riflemen or infantry sections in the early game. But at its core, you just want to survive until the 8-rad hits the field, and once the 8-rad is on the field, you use that as your mobile anti-infantry platform and look to destroy any allied infantry that also even support weapons that become overextended. In the late game, you can start to bring in the Panzer IVs, the Brumba or Panther as required, and if things get close or a long-term engagement is foreseen, just activate mechanized assaults, which will allow your vehicles to sustain in the engagement, and allied forces are unlikely to be able to last as long as you can. Now, if you're versing this, what I would give you as counter tips is to keep count of how many 8-rads your opponent is making. If your opponent has made 3 8-rads, they're likely to keep on making 8-rads. And what you should not do is do not tech to tank depot as the USF player or as British the company command post. Don't get tanks too early. If they recognize that you don't have as many units on the field as they do, they will simply get their 8-rads, doing an attack with attack move, all in, pushing their 8-rads with mechanized assaults with Pack 40s and Grenadiers coming up with the rear, and simply put, you won't be able to hold that engagement. And I've learnt this through multiple tests. The best thing to do if my opponent, I see they're making 4 to 5 8-rads, is to simply counter it by spamming Stuarts, M8s, Shaffis, and having anti-tank guns overlapping with mines and just waiting for them to be caught out of position effectively. Don't make tanks until you win an engagement, and then you can safely proceed to tanks. British forces are facing the meta with a combined arms army. It may be a bit of a slow start and necessary to sacrifice some early game map control, but their mid-game strength comes into fruition with some solid infantry veterancy and those reliable support weapons that they've got. The intent is to claim the win in the mid or late game. The battle group of choice is the Australian Defence Battle Group, with Australian Light Infantry and the 2-pounder anti-tank gun laying the foundations of the strategy. Other important options from the battle group include Vehicle Over Repair, which gives extra health, and selecting the Archer Tank Destroyer or even the Creeping Barrage depending on what the opponent's doing. The core primary units in this army composition are the Australian Light Infantry sections. I like to get one or two of those and I do upgrade them. The standard infantry sections, I like to round up the number of squads that I've got on the field to be 4. So that's a combination of Australian light infantry and infantry sections. And I'm excluding engineers from that. I like to get the standard infantry sections when I'm playing this meta build because it's handy to at some points get one boys AT rifle and to have one recon section present with the races and the ability to shoot the flare. Gives you some nice vision to help support your 2-pounder anti-tank gun from any flanks. Now the 2-pounder anti-tank gun is fantastic. It allows you to make use of some really nice long firing arcs and catch any light vehicles out of position. And then the first early vehicle that I get is typically in reaction to my opponent's vehicles, being a Humber or a Stuart. Personally, when I'm playing this meta strategy, I love playing with 1 or 2 Stuarts in this battle group. In particular, with getting one Stuart to have the Tank Commander upgrade for extra vision, infantry buffs, and the ability to counter vehicles. The secondary units that I include in this army are as follows. The Dingo is a great addition to this army composition as well. It just gives you that ability to have good vision on the map, provides healing, and that early game harassment without draining your own manpower. Depending on the situation, is a mortar to dislodge any support weapons, a Vickers MG to help protect the anti-tank gun's flanks or key points, and ultimately just getting the engineers out with the over-repaired Matildas if I can in the late game, or Crusaders to hit the flanks. And particularly with the Matildas, they can do a really nice job of holding the center. Key text for this build, I find coming from the training center, the infantry training center is a good complementary pick to this style of play because you're going to tend to have 4 to 5 infantry squads on the field, and having that veterancy boost, having that increase in accuracy really pays off. So when you can get the resources to get that, that's the first upgrade that I tend to get. In late game, I'd consider getting the tank training upgrade as well. Eventually you do want to transition to vehicles, and in particular with the Matilda and Crusader, they do benefit really well from that tank A training upgrade. But first, get the numerical numbers on the field first. I usually get this upgrade after I've got my second tank out on the field. Prior to that, yeah, it's not worth it. Keep on getting those tanks out. The other upgrade to consider here as well is snares, whether to get them for your standard infantry sections or not. Generally, I base this on the number of infantry sections that I do get. You can play this build with 4 infantry sections with no Australian light infantry. You can go full Australian light infantry if you want. But if I've got 2 infantry sections, I feel it's a good place to get snares. If I've only got 1, I tend to not get it. But 2 or more, it's well worth it just to help protect the flanks of your 2-pounder anti-tank guns. If you've only got 1 infantry section, that munitions, you can use snares on your Stuarts with the temporary tread shots. So keep that in mind. I find the Australian Defence Battle Group works best on open maps where the Australian Light Infantry and the 2-pounder anti-tank gun can work together to catch Axis units out on the open field and really punish them if they try to close the gap by using the Australian Vet Infantry Vet 1 ability and also the 2-pounder anti-tank gun, which will force Axis vehicles to come to a standstill, and you can really easily secure the kill. On urban maps, like Pacino Stalemate for example, I find it's harder to get this synergy between the 2 units working together, and also it's easier to be caught out of position. So quite often on these maps, I rather pick an alternative battle group, maybe Commandos, or getting out an AA Crusader and going for more of that vehicle-based play style. But it's a solid battle group nonetheless, and I feel it works on the majority of maps. My tips to counter this style of play from British forces is commits to strong anti-infantry based units, particularly having 1 vehicle present, whether that's like a 221 scout car or a flak filling half track, and make sure you just do not overextend your light vehicle so that 2-pounder anti-tank gun doesn't catch them out of position. Because honestly, the 2-pounder anti-tank gun is arguably the best anti-tank gun in the early to mid game because it has the ability to just kill any vehicles that enter its high rate of fire cone. And with such a wide arc, it's going to secure the kills. So make sure you treat it with respect because basically it's a dead vehicle without smoke cover. Respect this anti-tank gun, and if you've lost sight of it, do not position your vehicles into the unknown. Prevention's better than cure here. Just avoid it until you have the vision control on the field. Now, DAC is an interesting case in 1v1. They can be strong and they've got a number of viable strategies, but all options require decisive advantage to be created in the early game and mid game, with the intent to outright win or continuing to ride that snowball avalanche of wave that comes into the late game. The pressure cannot drop off, otherwise you run the risk of the formidable late game strength of British forces or the manpower cost effectiveness of United States forces, riflemen and allied war machine just to overrun you. So as DAC, you need to look for creating that advantage early. And thanks to Orange Pest for beating me up in some skirms to prove the point of what meta DAC looks like at the moment. It's definitely influenced the flavor of this video. I'll break it down what it is now. The Italian Combined Arms battle group is selected straight from the start to get out of Bersaglieri. The strategy is based around getting all of the 3 VPs as your first caps from the start of the game, with the Panzer Pioneer, Motorcycle, and Bersaglieri taking 1 each and quickly making that happen. From there, it's just about backcapping and holding the rest of the map. The intent with the battle group is to go hard on the left-hand side first, to get the Bersaglieri out first with the bolster +1 squad size, followed by the breeder LMGs. The right-hand side is just selected based on what is best to counter the opponent, but I generally like the Strafe and Pact of Steel. The core primary units include the starting Panzer Pioneer, a motorcycle. I like to get 3 Bersaglieri, and then from there tech to tier 1. At this point, it depends what's needed at the scenario, but generally I end up going for the medical truck, so you don't bleed any manpower, because the Bersaglieri can bleed a lot of manpower. And then otherwise, it's just an option of calling in the Panzerjäger with the 250 half-track, and if necessary, going for the flak half-track as well. They're all really good options. The situational secondary units, I like to get an MG34 if I'm floating manpower, and so I can suppress and lock down some areas of the map and maybe 1 VP, and then mixing in an 8-rad or Marder for additional anti-infantry or anti-tank respectively. In terms of key technologies, I find it's best to just stick to tier 1 and tier 2, so getting the light support company and the mechanized company. Going tier 3 for the Panzer company doesn't really serve a purpose when you can just get cheap light vehicles via Pact of Steel. But in terms of the army upgrades, the veteran squad leaders buff is always worth it for your infantry, and the vehicle survival package is really important to help keep the 250 half-tracks and the flak alive. When an 8-rad or Marder mass is established, it's a great idea in the late game to get the emergency repair kits as well, but just keep in mind with this strategy, most of the time you don't want to be aiming to win in the late game. You want to win before that, so it's generally better to go for some decisive plays rather than relying on emergency repair kits. This strategy, it works really well on wide maps where the victory points are spread out, so maps like Tunis and Faminerville. Whereas a map like Twin Beaches, where an opponent can easily secure a VP that's close to their base, it makes it a lot more difficult to play this strategy because you'll be overextending your army. So it might be beneficial to grab the resources instead or pick an alternative strategy. So this highlights the counters to this strategy for allies. So if you recognize your opponent is rushing the VPs with their first caps, just make it your intent to hold to a single VP. Keep your army together and slowly leapfrog forward. If you make your army isolated, the motorcycle will see this and the bursars will just swarm like a pack of wolves. So slow and steady wins the race here. I hope this video gives you a bit of insight into the metagame at the moment, and if you want to get some games in prior to the upcoming 1.8 patch on September the 17th, it'll give you a good position to do so. I'm sure the balance patch will bring a shake up to the metagame. Once I've playtested, I'll make another on-meta report and definitely make an off-meta report since off-meta madness is always good fun. Keep an eye out for that in the future, and I'll see you next time. Bye!